Realism and naturalism, too. Many American artists embraced realism in the mid-19th century. Realism began in France, but soon caught on throughout Europe and the United States. Artists focus on contemporary themes, producing realistic depictions of their newly industrialized society. The Thankful Poor by Henry Ossawa Tanner, oil on canvas, 1894. Prisoners from the Front by Winslow Homer, oil on canvas, 1866. America in the 19th century. During the 1800s, the United States experienced the Industrial Revolution, endured a costly fratricidal conflict, and wrestled with the social issues created by the war's outcome. In the first half of the century, new modes of transportation and communication had stitched the country together, but other forces were tearing it apart. Northern states embraced industrialization, while the South remained largely agricultural, with an economy reliant on slave labor. Regional differences led 11 Southern states to secede from the Union in 1861. The Civil War that followed was the first modern industrial conflict. Factories mass-produced weapons, railroads moved bodies of troops over great distances, commanders set orders by telegraph, navies fought with ironclad ships, and photographers worked alongside sketch artists on the battlefield to document the carnage. At the war's end in 1865, the newly reunited country faced a vexing problem: what to do about the 3.5 million former slaves in the South who were now citizens. For African Americans, it was only the beginning of a long, slow, and often frustrating struggle for civil rights. On the right, a Civil War photographer captured this image of Union General Sherman in 1864 near Atlanta, Georgia. American realism and naturalism. In post-Civil War America, many artists rejected the neoclassical style that turned to the art of classical Greece and Rome for inspiration. Instead, in a style originating in France, realist artists sought to portray the reality of the present-day human experience. They captured on canvas scenes of common people living their lives. Naturalist artists turned to their natural world for inspiration, painting humans and nature as they saw them, without a sense of idealization. The American public appreciated these styles of art that look real. Winslow Homer. Born in 1836 in Boston, Winslow Homer was a mainly self-taught, versatile illustrator, oil painter, and watercolorist. After a brief apprenticeship with a local lithographer, as a teenager, Homer began working for the well-known periodical Harper's Weekly. At that time, there was no process for printing photographs in a newspaper. Homer's task was to convert photographic images into accurate line drawings, which would then be carved into a wooden block and inked for printing. When the Civil War erupted in 1861, Harper's expanded Homer's role by sending him to the front to create his own illustrations of events. Homer moved to New York after the war ended in 1865 and continued his career as an illustrator, while also developing his talents as an oil painter. He created genre paintings of people farming, hunting, fishing, and children at play. Later in his career, he discovered the luminous quality of watercolors and moved to the Maine coast to paint extraordinary landscapes, or seascapes, and scenes of marine life. Lithographer, an artist who creates prints by drawing an image on a stone or metal plate with a greasy crayon or liquid. Drawing the image creates ink-absorbing areas and ink-resisting areas of the plate. When paper is pressed onto the inked plate, the ink transfers onto the paper. Here is a painting, Fresh Eggs, by Winslow Homer. It's a watercolor, gouache, and graphite on paper, 1874. Realism and naturalism, too. Homer's Prisoners from the Front. Homer's employment with Harper's Weekly gave him unprecedented access to the war front in Virginia. He made keen observations of soldiers and produced many lifelike sketches. After the war, Homer incorporated these images into his first oil paintings. While the title may be generic, Prisoners from the Front tells the story of an actual event. Homer based the painting on several sketches that he had made during the time he spent in camp and on the march with the Union Army in 1864. Homer based his painting, Prisoners from the Front, on sketches he had made during the time he spent with the Union Army in 1864, as it advanced through Virginia, trying to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond. It depicts an actual event when a Northern officer, Brigadier General Francis Channing Barlow, receives 3 Confederate prisoners of war. Homer had spent time in General Barlow's camp while working at the front. He portrayed Barlow as an intelligent, dignified, thoughtful man, evidenced through his expression and posture. In the 3 Confederate prisoners, Homer portrays from right to left a defiant, proud Virginia cavalryman, an old man who has witnessed the end of his Southern way of life, and a young rebel with bullet holes in his cap. 2 Union soldiers stand behind the prisoners. Though Homer never wrote about the identity of the soldiers, one art critic has suggested the one on the left may be African American. Numerous African American soldiers fought with the Union troops in the war that ended slavery in the South. For the setting, Homer shows the aftermath of war. During the Civil War, battlefields devastated the American wilderness. Ironically, today, many Civil War battlefields are being devastated by modern development. Homer's realism. Homer was widely admired for his realistic style. He did not romanticize the miseries of war. With a desire to depict the truth, he thoughtfully documented the soldiers and prisoners from the front as true individuals with stories to tell of hopes and hardships. His muted palette reveals the captured soldiers' expressions, posture, and varying states of psychological distress. All eyes are on the polished, self-assured Union general. The subdued colors in the ravaged landscape do not distract from the figures in the foreground. Here are some images. Homer rendered his figures in this Major General Francis Channing Barlow after actual Civil War soldiers. Prisoners. Winslow Homer's portrayal of Confederate prisoners taken in 1864 bears a strikingly realistic resemblance to Confederate prisoners photographed after the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863. Henry Ossawa Tanner. Born in Pittsburgh in 1859 to an African Methodist Episcopal minister father and a mother who escaped from slavery through the Underground Railroad, Henry Ossawa Tanner is considered the most accomplished African American painter of his time. Tanner's interest in painting emerged in his teenage years. In 1879, he enrolled at Philadelphia's prestigious Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. Under the tutelage of Thomas Eakins, Tanner's talents blossomed and he gained a solid foundation in human anatomy. Tanner's early work combined Eakins' naturalist and realist tendencies, a rigorous study of nature and the human form, with a desire to portray the lives of ordinary people. Tanner produced very few genre paintings before turning to biblical themes, which he believed show a strong connection to the contemporary experiences of African Americans. As a Black artist in post-Civil War America, Tanner had difficulty gaining recognition and finding a market for his paintings. In 1891, he moved to Paris, where his talent was greatly admired in French art circles. Tanner made his home there until his death in 1983. And here is an image of Henry Ossawa Tanner, 1859 to 1937. And here's Thomas Eakins. As professor of the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, Thomas Eakins was a controversial figure. He believed that students should study anatomy by observing live models and dissecting cadavers rather than by listening to dull lectures. Eakins also encouraged African Americans and women to study art, radical notions at the time. For Tanner, studying with the progressive and inspirational Eakins had a profound effect on his career. Tanner's The Thankful Poor. The Thankful Poor is representative of Tanner's early genre paintings in which he depicted ordinary scenes of contemporary African American life. In this painting, he presents a young boy sitting down for a meal with an elderly man. Tanner captures a quiet moment as the modest pair bows their heads in prayer. The figure's modest clothing and sparse table suggest a humble existence. Tanner used thick, expressive brushstrokes to give his subjects a sense of weight and three-dimensional form on the canvas. He rendered the images and the sparse objects in the room with careful detail, using looser brushstrokes to suggest the color and light of the wall and curtain. Tanner's masterful manipulation of light. Tanner used light and shadows to create a pious mood, and he also employed dark and light values to create convincing sense of space. Light dances across the pottery on the table and disappears within the deep folds of the tablecloth. Tanner also employed dark and light values to create a convincing sense of space. The bright sunlight reflects off the back wall and creates a striking contrast against the boy's thick umber hair and the man's dark silhouette. Viewers get a sense of space and piety through Henry Ossawa Tanner's careful portrayal of light and shadow. Light and shadow. Tanner portrays bright sunlight that reflects off the back wall and creates a striking contrast against the boy's thick umber hair and the man's dark silhouette. Sunlight streams in through the window, casting luminous highlights across the head, shoulders, and weathered hands of the elderly man. His pose suggests prayer and concentration, which is intensified by his deeply shadowed face. Tanner casts a beautiful glowing light on the countenance of the young boy, revealing an expression of quiet thanksgiving. Light dances across the pottery on the table and disappears within the deep folds of the tablecloth. The struggle for dignity. Mass media of the 19th century typically portrayed African Americans as caricatures, stereotypes, or worse. Henry Ossawa Tanner sought with his painting to present a more realistic viewpoint, as can be seen in the banjo lesson. Many of the artists who have represented Negro life have seen only the comic, the ludicrous side of it, he wrote, and have lacked sympathy with and appreciation for the warm, big heart that dwells within such a rough exterior. Quiz time. What technique did Winslow Homer use in Prisoners from the Front to focus the viewer's attention on the figures? Homer used muted colors for the background. Which statement best describes Henry Ossawa Tanner's approach to painting? Tanner used expressive brushstrokes to paint figures with a sense of weight and three-dimensional form. What is a realistic characteristic of Henry Ossawa Tanner's The Thankful Poor? The portrayal of ordinary African Americans.